testing. What is hypothesis testing? And then there is a type 1 and type 2 error. And then there is a step in hypothesis testing, okay, how to answer for hypothesis testing questions. And then in hypothesis testing, dia sama macam confidence interval, okay, kalau kita tengok, kita ada case for 1 population mean and 2 population mean. So same goes for hypothesis testing. We have the same case either for 1 population mean or 2 population means. Okay, so the difference is on the formula lah. Okay, this one we have confidence interval, get the lower and upper limit, but for hypothesis testing we only look at your test statistic, okay, the value. Okay, and then we have a new one, hypothesis testing. If you have more than 2 population mean, okay, maksudnya you ada 3 or 4 groups, more than 2, so we will use ANOVA, one-way analysis of variance, and the last one is test of independence. Okay, so all these contents you akan answer the questions in hypothesis testing. Okay, so for hypothesis testing ni, okay, dia punya steps ni kita ada 5. Okay, we have 5 steps. Okay, so maksudnya if you want to answer the questions for hypothesis testing for population mean, ANOVA or test of independence, so you should do all the steps. Okay, so that's why for ANOVA and test of independence, they cover under hypothesis testing. Okay, so we go to the concept of hypothesis testing. Okay, so what is actually hypothesis testing? Okay, so hypothesis is also known as test of significance. Okay, so another name for hypothesis is test of significance. And then kat sini, hypothesis is a statement made about the value of the population parameter. So actually hypothesis ni adalah statement. Okay, statement of what? Statement of population parameter. So usually in our hypothesis, we will have null and alternative hypothesis. Okay. So for this hypothesis, H null and H1, so in this hypothesis, we only can write population parameter. Maksudnya dekat dalam sini hanya boleh ada population, mean for population. Okay, you can write your hypothesis for your mean for sample. For example, this one. Okay, tak boleh. Dia mesti, your hypothesis ni mesti population parameter. Okay, tak kisahlah mean ke, standard deviation or variance, make sure all the value is for the population. Okay, but in our syllabus, we only cover on population mean. Okay, that's why you punya hypothesis tu dia akan jadi mu sahaja. Okay, and then kata a claim or statement is assumed to be true unless it is proven to be otherwise. So kita akan kata our claim or our statement tu true unless bila we test, kita kata dia adalah false. Okay, so that is hypothesis. Okay, the statement that you made to know either the statement is true or not. So for hypothesis testing, it is a procedure or method to test our hypothesis. Okay, this hypothesis yang kita dah buat ni, so kita nak test either this hypothesis is correct or not, so we will use hypothesis testing. Okay, usually hypothesis testing adalah method ataupun procedure. Okay, so kat sini kata if the statement is made about the value of parameter, we would like to test whether the statement made is true or not. So how? So kita akan guna hypothesis testing. Inilah dia punya the meaning dia. Okay, a procedure to decide whether to accept or reject the statement made regarding the value of the population parameter. Okay, so this is the steps how to do hypothesis testing. Okay, roughly the punya steps dia. Okay, the first one, we made a statement about the population parameter. Okay, you write your hypothesis. Okay, and then after that you take a sample, a random sample from the population, and then you calculate the sample statistic. Okay, so you need to find a value, okay, to test either this statement is true or not. Okay, and then based on the information from sample, make a decision. So for decision, okay, we only have 2 decisions. Okay, either we want to reject our H null or fail to reject our H null. Okay, so your decision only has these two je lah. Tak adalah tiba-tiba you write accept H1 ke no. Okay, only reject H null or fail to reject H null ataupun do not reject H null. Okay, so this is roughly the steps how to do the hypothesis testing. Okay, so we look on the terms or definition that we will use in this topic. Okay, so the first one is hypothesis. Okay, so hypothesis is a statement about the value of the population parameter. Okay, so a statement about population parameter. So dia mesti population parameter. Cannot be apa namanya itu statistic, sample statistic. Okay, and then hypothesis testing adalah procedure whereby sample information is used to decide whether to accept or reject the statement made regarding the value of the population parameter. Okay, and then we have null hypothesis. So null hypothesis we denoted as H null. Okay, HO, okay, H0. So this is our null hypothesis, which is a statement that the population parameter has a specific value. So we will use H null to represent the null hypothesis and always stated using the equal sign. So our H null is always equal. Okay, so when you write your H null hypothesis, the sign must be equal. Okay, it cannot be this one. Okay, tak boleh lah. H null must be equal. Okay, and then we have alternative hypothesis or our H1. Okay, which is the hypothesis opposite to the H null, and this hypothesis will be accepted if H null is rejected. That means if we reject our H null, so our conclusion nanti dia akan jadi your H1 lah. Okay, your alternative hypothesis. And then also known as research hypothesis. So this is another name for alternative hypothesis. And then dia kata the alternative hypothesis can be in two forms, either directional or non-directional. Okay, so maksudnya for directional ni maksudnya dia ada direction, has direction. Okay, either positive or negative, either positive side or negative side. Okay, for example, the first one is more than. So more than is for the right tail test. So, maksudnya kita akan test on the positive side. Okay, and then for H1, if the case is less than, so we will look on the negative side. Okay, so kita akan tengok belah sini lah. Okay, and then for non-directional, okay, maksudnya no direction. So apa yang maksudnya dengan no direction? If your H1 is unequal, so maksudnya we do not know the direction either positive or negative. Okay, so we do not know which which side untuk unequal ni, sama ada dia belah positif or belah negatif. But for directional, we know the exact direction, either more than positive side or less than negative side. Okay, so this is for your H1. Okay, for H null, so H null dia hanya ada equal. Okay, equal sahaja, equal sign. But for H1, it can be more than or less than or unequal. Okay, so for H1, it can be these three cases lah. Okay, so follow the questions. Okay, so that is for alternative hypothesis. And then we also have two types of tests for your H1 alternative hypothesis, which is one tail test and two tail test. Okay, so what is the difference between these two is for one tail test, dia kata a test of any statistical hypothesis where the alternative is one-sided. Okay, we only look on one side. Okay, maksudnya sama ada kita nak tengok on positive or negative. Okay, so satu je lah kita tengok either belah this one or belah this one. Okay, but for two tail test is a test of any statistical hypothesis where the alternative is two-sided. So kita tengok belah positive and negative. Okay, so for one tail test is for directional form. Okay, either more than or less than, and then for two tail test is for the case unequal. Okay, since we will look at on the both side. Okay, so that is the difference between one tail test and two tail test. Okay, and then the next term we have significant levels. Okay, so significant level is the maximum probability of committing a type 1 error. So this probability is symbolized as alpha. So alpha is your significant level. And then test statistic. So test statistic is a single number calculated from a sample data as a basis in deciding to reject or not to reject the null hypothesis. So we will look at based on this value, your test statistic value, either to make your decision, either to reject or fail to reject your H null. And then we have two type of region, which is rejection region or critical region, or acceptance region or non-rejection region. Okay, so for rejection region, if the value lies on this region, so kita kata kita akan reject H null. Okay, if your value, your test statistic ni lies on the non-rejection region, so kita kata kita akan fail to reject H null. So kita support our H null statement. And the last one, we have critical value, which is the value of test statistic that divide the non-rejection region from the rejection region. Okay, so untuk lebih nampak for these terms, okay, we will look at on this graph. Okay, so we have null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. So macam I mentioned before, for null hypothesis is always equal. And then for alternative hypothesis, we have three cases, which is for one tail test, we only look on one side. And two tail test, kita akan tengok on two-sided. Okay, so for one tail test, for example, this is for right tail. Okay, which is we will look at on the positive side. Okay, the case is more than. So this is our distribution. Okay, and then this is our critical value. We know that critical value is the value that divide the non-rejection region from rejection region. Okay, yang membahagikan rejection and non-rejection region. So how to know which is rejection region and non-rejection region? So now our case is on right tail, positive value. So we know that we will reject on the positive side. So this will be your rejection region. Okay, and then if the value of test statistic lies in this region, so kita akan reject H null. Okay, but if the value lies on the non-rejection region, so kita akan fail to reject H null. Okay, so this value either to reject or fail to reject H null will depends on the value of test statistic. Okay, refer kepada this value. And then if the case is left tail, okay, so we look at on the negative side. So this is your critical value. So your critical value will be negative value since the critical value is on the negative side. And then to know what which is your rejection and non-rejection region. So since we look at on the negative side, so this will be your rejection region. Okay, so if the value of test statistic lies on this region, so we will reject H null. Okay, so if it lies on the non-rejection region, so kita kata fail to reject H null. Okay, and then for case one tail test, our alpha is only alpha. Okay, so when we write the critical value, our CV, so the value to only alpha sahaja. Okay, no need to divide by 2. Okay, but if the case is two tail test, we have two-sided. Okay, for positive and negative side. Okay, so this will be your rejection region, and this one is your non-rejection region, and then this is your critical value. So you will have positive and negative critical value. And then your alpha, since the case is on two-sided, so your alpha need to divide that by 2. Okay, you kena bahagi 2. Okay, so this is explain on these terms. Okay, significant level, test statistic, rejection and non-rejection region, and also critical value. Okay, so itu adalah apa nama itu graph to explain all the definition and terms. Okay, so we look on the next definition. Okay, we have another 2 definition, which is type 1 and type 2 errors. Okay, so what is the difference between type 1 and type 2 error? So for type 1 error is the null hypothesis is rejected when it is true. Okay, and then for type 2 error, the null hypothesis is failed to be rejected when it is false. And the last one, we have power of the test, which is the probability of rejecting hash null given a specific alternative is true. Okay, so untuk nak explain more on type 1 and type 2 error, so we look at on this table. Okay, so we have our null hypothesis, our hash null. Okay, so if our statement is true, our hash null is true. Okay, so supposedly our decision, we need to fail to reject our hash null since we know that this statement is true. Okay, but when we test, we reject our hash null. Alright, so when we reject our hash null, so berlakulah type 1 error. Okay, which is false negative. So we denoted type 1 error as alpha. Okay, and then for type 2 error, okay, macam mana type 2 error happen is when your hash null is false. Okay, so supposedly the correct decision, we need to fail to reject our hash null since we need to reject our hash null since we know that this statement is false. Okay, but when we test, we fail to reject our hash null. Okay, so we said that this one is true. Supposedly the statement is false. Okay, but when we test, kita fail to reject hash null, mengatakan this is true. So berlakulah type 2 error. Okay, we denoted it as beta. Okay, so nak lebih nampak, I ada tunjuk contoh. Okay, so this is example. Okay, example. So for example, the statement for your hash null is you are not pregnant. Okay, so ini I focus on type 1 error. Okay, so if you look at the statement, so for hash null, we said that you are not pregnant, and our alternative hypothesis the opposite. So kita kata you are pregnant, but in this case, we know that the man is not pregnant. So we know that our hash null is true. Okay, but the doctor said that you are pregnant. That means we reject our hash null. We reject our hash null, so we said that he is pregnant. So that's why berlakunya type 1 error. Okay, we know that this hypothesis is true, but we reject our hash null. So berlakulah type 1 error. Okay, so for type 2 error, okay, so for type 2 error, so for hash null, okay, so if you look at the second picture, okay, so we know that hash null is false. Yes, since the statement for hash null is you are not pregnant. Since we know that this woman is pregnant. Okay, so we know that this is false. But when we test, we fail to reject our hash null. So kita mengatakan statement ni betul, you are not pregnant. So terjadilah type 2 error. Okay, so nak mudah nampak dia, you just refer to this table. Okay, your hash null is true, but you reject. So berlakulah type 1 error, and then hash null you is false, but you fail to reject your hash null. So berlakulah type 2 error. Okay, so this is for type 1 and type 2 error. Okay, so make sure you can differentiate between these two lah. Okay, type 1 error berlaku macam mana, type 2 error berlaku macam mana. Okay, so itu adalah untuk definition for this topic. Okay, so now we look on the steps. Okay, so macam I mentioned before this, to answer the questions for hypothesis testing, you need to do all these steps. Okay, so previously in confidence interval, you just need to find the lower and upper limit, then siap, settle. Okay, but for hypothesis testing, if the question asks you the question for hypothesis testing, so you need to answer all these steps. Okay, baru you boleh dapat full marks. Okay, so what is the difference, okay, between topic 3 and topic 4? Okay, so for topic 3, usually the question will ask you to construct or to find or to calculate. Okay, 95% confidence interval. Okay, so the keyword here is confidence interval. Okay, so if the question asks you to construct or to calculate or to find the confidence interval, we know that we need to find the lower and upper limit. Okay, So which formula that you will use is based on this one lah. Okay, confidence interval punya formula. Yang ada plus minus your margin of error. Okay, but for topic 4, okay, so the questions will ask you to test at 5% significant level. Or dia kata at 5% level of significant, test apa-apa. Okay, so the keyword now is significant level or level of significance. So if the question mention about significant level or level of significance, so you need to do all these steps. Okay, from your hypothesis until your conclusion. Okay, so make sure you can differentiate between these two. And then the next one yang berbeza dari segi formula. Okay, so formula kalau kita tengok for confidence interval, for example you have this one. So this is the formula. But for case hypothesis testing, sama juga, you look at either the variance or standard deviation for the population is known or unknown. So for known, you will use Z distribution. For unknown, look at the sample size. If large, you use Z. If small, you use E. But the formula, dia akan you olah sikit lah. Okay, dia akan jadi macam ini. Okay, but dia still, this is your standard error mean. Okay, the formula is still the same. Okay, cuma kedudukan dia kalau ni after your statistical table, but now yang dekat you punya apa nama itu, yang bawah dia punya value ni is your standard error mean. Okay, so itu adalah beza topic 3 and topic 4. Okay, so this is the step if you want to answer the hypothesis testing questions. The first step is you state the null and alternative hypothesis. So you write your H null and H1. So make sure you write H null first, baru you punya H1. So tak boleh tiba-tiba you buat H1 and then H null. Okay, tak boleh lah. Okay, and then make sure when you write your hypothesis, you guna ni, nota bertindih. Okay, so saya tak nak you answer buat macam ni. Okay, tak nak. Make sure nota bertindih. Okay, so that is the first step. You write your hypothesis. And then the second step, determine the appropriate test statistic and calculate. Okay, so for this case, okay, untuk population mean, we have 3 methods. Okay, 3 ways to test our value. Okay, the first one is we can use by traditional or by formula. And then the second one, we can use p-value. So this is for population mean. Okay. Kalau for ANOVA and test of independence, kita tengok lain pula lah. Okay. And then the third one is based on confidence interval. Okay. We have these 3 method. Tak kisah you pilih yang mana-mana. Okay. Depends kepada questions. And then determine the critical value. So for critical value, okay, kita hanya cari our critical value if in step 2 you use by traditional. Okay, so if in step 2 you use by formula, okay, you use this formula. Okay, so baru you kena find your critical value. Okay, but if you use p-value or confidence interval based on step 2, so no need to find the critical value. Okay, so untuk confidence interval ni, step yang ketiga ni, so maksudnya you will look at on this formula lah yang kita belajar in topic 3. Okay, so itu adalah untuk step yang kedua and ketiga. And then the next one is decision rule and decision. Okay, so nanti kita akan tengoklah for each method. And the last one is your conclusion, either enough or not enough evidence. Okay, so basically this is the 5 steps, okay, that you need to do if you want to answer the questions for hypothesis testing. Okay, so we look at on the every steps ni. Okay, the details for every step. For example, for the first one, which is state the null and alternative hypothesis. Okay, so for H null is always equal. Okay, and then for H1 it can be less than, more than, or unequal. Okay, depends on the questions. So how to know which symbol, okay, that you can write? So you can refer to these common phrases. Okay, so if the question asks you which is greater, above, or higher, so your H1 will be more than lah. Okay, and then if the case is ask you either below, less than, lower, or shorter, so kita akan guna less than. Okay, so dekat H1 ni dia akan jadi less than. You kena ingat, for H null is always equal. Okay, and then kalau dia kata equal, so ni akan duduk for you punya H1 lah. Okay, and then the last one is unequal. Okay, so this is the sign that we use to write your hypothesis. And we look at on the example. Okay, so for example, we have three situations, okay, A, B, and C. So for situation A, a contractor wishes to lower heating bills by using a special type of insulation in houses. So the average of the monthly heating bills is 78. So we know that this is the average for the population since the sentence do not mention about the sample size. So kita tahu average or mean for the population, the symbol will be mu. So this is our mu. Okay. So how to write your hypothesis? We know that for our H null is always equal. Mu is equal to 78. Okay. So to write your H1, you will refer to the questions. Since in these questions, dia kata a contractor wishes to lower heating bills. Maksudnya, dia nak less than 78. That's why dekat sini, our H1 ni is less than. Okay, so itu adalah untuk the first situation. So we look at on the second situation. A chemist invent an additive to increase the life of an automobile battery. So it is known that the mean lifetime of the automobile battery is 36 months. So we know that this is the mean for the population. Okay, so macam biasa, your H null is always equal. But for your H1, okay, we will refer to the questions. Since dekat sini the statement kata a chemist invent an additive to increase the life of an automobile battery. So dia nak lebih daripada 36. So that's why dekat sini dia more than. Okay, more than 36. And the last situation, a medical researcher is interested in finding out whether a new medication will have any undesirable side effect. So he is particularly concerned with the pass rate, and then he knows that the mean pass rate for the population under study is 82. So this is our mu. Okay, so untuk H null, kita akan always write is equal. But for H1, since the questions tak ada cakap nak tahu sama ada dia punya heartbeat tu more than or less than 82, dia just nak tahu sama ada 82 ataupun tak 82. Okay, that's why dekat sini dia adalah unequal. Okay, so this is how to write your hypothesis. Okay, so itu adalah untuk the first step. So we look at on the second step. Okay, so the second step is to determine the appropriate test and calculate. Okay, so macam I mentioned, okay, we have three methods. Okay, so either you want to use by traditional. Okay, so this is the first method, by traditional or formula. Okay, so this value you can calculate or get from your SPSS output. Okay, you can get the value either manually calculate the value or you can get from the SPSS output. If the question do not give SPSS output, so you need to calculate manually. Okay, or the second step, you use p-value. Okay, but for p-value, you only can use p-value if there is SPSS output. Okay, since p-value, you can't calculate the value. Okay, tak boleh nak kira. You kena ada daripada SPSS output, baru you boleh dapat. Okay, and the third one is confidence interval. Okay, so for confidence interval sama, you can calculate or get from SPSS output. Okay, so this is on topic 3. Okay, use formula in topic 3. Okay, so this is the three methods, okay, yang you boleh buat, depends kepada soalan. If the question mention use p-value. So kena follow lah the questions. But if the question do not mention any method, so you can choose, okay, any method. And then step 3 is determine the critical value, your CV. Okay, so for CV, okay, you need to find or determine the critical value if in step 2 you use by traditional or using the formula. Okay, barulah you kena find your critical value. Okay, if in the second step you use p-value or confidence interval, no need to find the critical value. Okay, so just determine the critical value if you use formula in step 2. Okay, so for your critical value, okay, you kena tengok either the case is 1 tail test or 2 tail test. Okay, so if the case is 1 tail test, okay, so we know that for 1 tail test we have more than and less than. Okay, so untuk case 1 tail test, okay, nak lebih nampak, I buat sekejap ya. Okay, so 1 tail test, kita ada 2. Okay, kita ada either our H1 ni adalah more than ataupun H1 kita ni adalah less than. Okay, so if the case your H1, okay, yang you dah write in first step ni, if the case is more than, so our critical value will be okay. Since the case is on the positive side, so your critical value will be positive value. Okay, but if the case is less than, okay, your punya H1 is less than, so dia akan jadi negative. But your alpha is still alpha since the case is 1 tail test. Okay, tak perlu nak bahagi 2. Okay, so this is the case for 1 tail test. Okay, untuk satu side sahaja. Okay, but if the case is for 2 tail test, okay, so our H1 dia adalah unequal. Okay, so bila case dia adalah unequal, so we know that we need to divide our alpha by 2 and kita ada both side plus minus. Okay, ataupun plus minus T alpha over 2 degree of freedom. Okay, so apa-apa for critical value, you must refer to your H1. Okay, yang you dah write dekat first step ni. Okay, kena tengok. If the case is less than, so our critical value will be negative value. If the case is more than, so our critical value will be positive. If the case is unequal, so critical value will be plus minus. Okay, since we look at on both sides. Okay, so itu adalah untuk step 3 for critical value. So critical value only if you use by traditional in step 2. Okay, if you use p-value or confidence interval, no need to check this with this lah. Okay, tak perlu nak tengok pun critical value. Okay, so itu adalah the third step. And the next step for step 4 is your decision rule and decision. Okay, so for decision rule, we will look at on our method in step 2. If you use by traditional, so this will be your decision rule. Okay, so for decision rule, sama, you will refer to your H1. Okay, if your H1 is more than, so you will reject your H0 if Z or T calculated is more than Z or T critical value. Okay, if your H1 is less than, so kita nak tengok on negative side, so we will reject our H0 if Z or T calculated is less than negative Z or negative T critical value. Okay, if your H1 is unequal, okay, so kita akan reject if Z or T calculated is more than Z or T critical value on the positive side, or kita akan reject bila Z or T calculated is less than negative Z or negative T calculated on the negative side. Okay, so kita ada dua benda lah kita kena tengok. Okay, so ini adalah bila you use statistic or by traditional in step 2. But if you use p-value, okay, so if you use p-value, so the decision rule sama macam kita buat leaving test. Okay, so for leaving test, we will reject H0 if p-value is less than or equal to alpha. Okay, and for case apa namanya itu hypothesis testing ni, okay, you kena hati-hati. If you use p-value, okay, you need to check either the value given in the SPSS output is for two tail or for one tail. Okay, so you will look at on the significant tu, dia akan mention either for two tail. So if the output write two tail, so we know that this is the p-value for two tail. If the output only give you significant sahaja, so we know that this is for case one tail. Okay, this one is for two tail. Okay, you kena tengok. If your hypothesis, okay, when your alternative hypothesis you adalah unequal, okay, so if the output give you the p-value for two tail, so you just take the value. Okay, but if the case H1U is unequal, but the SPSS output give you the value for one tail. Okay, that value, that p-value is for one tail, but our case is two tail. So what you need to do with the p-value, you need to times with 2. Okay, you kena double lah the value. Okay, so itu baru betul the exact value lah for two tail test. Okay, but if the case is for right or left tail, maksudnya you punya H1 tu more than or H1U is less than, okay, for one tail. So if the output give you the value for two tail, but your case is one tail, so what you need to do with the p-value, you need to divide by 2. Okay, kena bahagi 2 sebab nak dapatkan hanya untuk satu tail sahaja. Okay, but if your case is one tail and the value for p-value is for one tail, so just take the value. Okay, tak perlu nak buat apa-apa. So untuk p-value you kena hati-hati. Tengok dulu you punya case tu, H1 tu, case dia yang mana satu, and then tengok dia punya output tu, tally tak dengan you punya H1. Okay, so that is for p-value. And then the last method, if you use confidence interval, so dekat step yang kedua tu, you guna this formula nak dapatkan the value. You dapat lower and upper limit, and then how to write the decision rule for confidence interval. So we will reject our hash null if 0 is not in the confidence interval. Okay, so kalau kosong tak ada, you akan reject your hash null. Okay, so ini based on lower and upper limit lah. Okay, you kena tengok, check either 0 is in the confidence interval or not. Okay, so after that, you buatlah decision. So decision dia tengoklah reject ke fail to reject your hash null. And barulah you make your conclusion. Okay, either enough or not enough evidence untuk mengatakan our statement. Okay, so basically this is the steps, okay, how to answer hypothesis testing questions. Okay, so any questions? Boleh?
Yang 4.3
so maybe faham?
Saya ada soalan. Untuk yang 4.3 tu explain sikit boleh pasal p-value tu. So tadi saya tengok macam pening sikit.
Macam pening sikit. Okay. So okay, so contoh, okay, kalau tak nak pening jap I cari ada tak example. Contoh. Okay, contoh. Okay, so nanti kalau you tengok untuk output, okay, you punya output dia akan tulis macam ni. Significant to tail dekat SPSS output tu. Okay, so we know that this is our p-value. Okay, but our p-value is for two tail, for your case unequal. Okay, so in this case, your H1 is less than. So we know that less than is for one tail. This p-value is for two tail. So what you need to do with this p-value, you need to divide by 2. Okay, untuk dapatkan value p-value untuk one tail sahaja. Okay, tapi contohnya dekat output ni, dia hanya bagi, okay, dia hanya bagi dekat sini tak ada this one. Dia hanya bagi significant sahaja. So we know that this is the value, p-value for one tail. And then you check with your case, H1U is one tail. So you just terus ambil je lah the value. Okay, tak perlu buat apa-apa. So kalau tak nampak, mungkin kat sini kita buat 0.005. Okay. So 0.05. Contohnya macam ni. Okay. So kita tahu sekarang ni kita punya hash null, ni kita punya hash 1. Okay. So hash 1 kita ni sekarang ni case dia adalah less than. So we know that this is the value, p value for one tail. So bila you write your p value, you just ambil je 0.05. Okay. So another case we have our hash 1 is unequal. Okay. So this is p value for one tail. But our case is for two tail. So what you need to do with the value, so p value tu, since value ni adalah untuk satu tail, case kita adalah dua tail, so you kena darab dengan 2. Barulah dapat value dia yang betul. Okay, you tak bolehlah ambil 0.05 je. So salah lah sebab case ni adalah case two tail. Okay, so ini adalah untuk yang ni. Kalau case ni pula dia memang bagi untuk two tail. Okay, so sekarang memang dia bagi p value ni untuk two tail. Okay, so case kita ni adalah case one tail. P value ni for two tail. So to get the value for p value, what you need to do is you need to divide by 2. Okay, since the p value ni given for two tail. Okay, and then kalau case dia adalah for two tail, so nilai p value tu apa you kena buat? You just take the value 0.05. Since this p value ni memang untuk two tail. Case you pun memang two tail. So you just ambil sajalah. Boleh? Boleh tak? Boleh faham?
Alright, faham dah.
Okay. So yang itu je lah you kena hati-hati. Tengok case ni untuk p value ni untuk one tail ke untuk two tail. And then you check with your h1. Okay, case tu one tail ke two tail. Dia mesti tally lah. Okay. So itu adalah untuk p value. Okay. So kalau tak ada any questions, so now we will look at on hypothesis testing for a mean, for one population mean. Okay, so this is your hypothesis. Okay, so untuk one population mean, kita akan, since kita tak boleh compare with other population, hanya ada satu population, so you punya hypothesis dia akan compare with number. Okay, dia akan ada value dia berapa. Okay, so untuk H null is always equal, but for H1 it can be less than, more than, or unequal, depends on the questions. Okay, so we will have two cases. Okay, either variance or standard deviation for the population is known or unknown. So if known, we will use the calculated, and then this one will be sigma lah, standard deviation for the population. But if the case is variance or standard deviation for the population is unknown, so we will look at on the sample size, either n is more than or equal to 30 or less than 30. Okay, if the case is more than or equal to 30, we will use z calculated, and then kat sini standard deviation for the sample. But if the case is n is less than 30, so we will use t distribution, and then this is the formula. Okay, so sama in this case, if the question asks you to find the mean difference, so the mean difference is on the top ni. Okay, yang dekat atas ni adalah you punya mean difference. Okay, untuk yang bawah ni adalah you punya standard error mean. So the formula is the same lah, masih lagi sama. Okay, cuma kedudukan dia je berbeza compare to this one. So kalau yang macam this one, this is your margin of error, and then this is your standard error mean. Okay, but in this case, now kita ada this is your apa nama itu? The difference tu, mean difference, and then this is your standard error mean. Okay, kedudukan dia berbeza. So kita tengok untuk first case, which is for variance or standard deviation for the population is known. Okay, so tak kisah you punya n besar ke kecil. So there is the assumption random sample either n is more than or equal to 30, or the population is normally distributed when n is less than 30, and then non-variance or standard deviation for the population. So this is our first step. Okay, we write our null and alternative hypothesis. So for H1, refer to the questions. Okay, tanya yang mana. And then for the second step, so this is the step kita guna formula. Okay, untuk p-value dengan confidence interval bukanlah. Okay, yang ini untuk when we use formula. So we will use z calculated. And then the third step, okay, since we use formula, so we need to find the critical value. Okay, so for critical value, we will refer to our H1. Okay, so if our H1, the case is less than, so our critical value will be negative z alpha. Why negative? Because we look on the negative side. Why only alpha? Since the case is one tail. Okay, one tail test. Okay, and then if your H1 is more than, so your z will be positive, and then alpha is alpha. And then if the case is unequal, your value for z plus minus and then z alpha over 2. Okay, so this is for case 1 tail test, this one for 2 tail test. Okay, and then for decision rule sama, this decision rule you will compare to your H1. Okay, if the H1 is negative side, so we will reject H null if z calculated is less than negative z alpha. Or if the case H1 is more than, so kita akan reject H null if z calculated is more than z alpha. Or if the case is unequal, H1 is unequal, so we will reject our H null if z calculated is less than negative z alpha over 2 or more than. So ini tak kisahlah, you letak terbalik pun tak apa. Okay, ataupun you buat z calculated more than z alpha over 2 or z calculated less than negative z alpha over 2, boleh, tak kisah. Okay. And then this is the fourth step, and then your decision, and then the last one is your conclusion. Okay, so there is the 5 steps, okay, untuk you nak jawab soal hypothesis testing. Okay, so now kita tengok on the first example. Okay, so untuk case hypothesis testing, sama macam apa nama itu, confidence interval, you baca every sentence and then you list out all the information. Okay, in this case, a company producing 3A batteries claim that its batteries last an average of 24 months with a standard deviation of 3 months. So if you look at in this sentence, okay, dia tak ada mention about the sample size. So we know that the average is for the population. So maksudnya your mu is equal to 24. Okay, and the standard deviation refer to your population. So the standard deviation for the population, sigma. Okay, and then barulah a sample of 36 battery was tested. So that is your N. And then the mean life of this battery was 23 months. So the mean for sample, so your X bar. And then using 5% level of significance. So this is the keyword, level of significance. So you know that you need to do all the 5 steps. Okay, there is evidence to indicate that the mean lifetime of 3A batteries is below 24 months. Okay, dia suruh you test. So macam biasa, first you check. Okay, nak tahu nak guna formula yang mana, since the case is standard deviation for the population, we know that the case is variance or standard deviation for the population is known. So bila known, kita tahu kita akan guna this formula lah. Okay, z calculated. So first step, you kena buat lah daripada step 1 until step yang kelima. So untuk your hypothesis, we know that our H null is always equal. Okay, equal to what value? This one lah. You punya mean for population. So mu is equal to 24. Okay. Walaupun soalan ni kata below 24. Okay, but we know that our H null is always equal. So our H1, since the question asks you to test either below 24, so kat sini dia akan jadi mu is less than 24. So this is our claim ataupun questions. Okay, question tanya bawah 24 tak? Okay, so that is the first step, your hypothesis. The second step is your test statistic. So which formula yang kita nak guna? Kita akan guna z calculated. Okay, so this is the formula. So just substitute the value. Okay, masukkan saja nilai dia. 23 minus 24 over 3 over square root of 36. Okay. So what will be the value? 23 minus 24 over 3 over square root of 36. What is the value?
Negative 2.
Negative 2. Okay, so this is your test statistic. And then the third step, since in step 2 we use formula, so kita kena cari your CV. Okay, so CV ni kita akan tengok based on your H1. So in this case, since H1 is less than, so in step 2 we use Z distribution. So kat sini dia mesti Z jugalah. Okay. And then since our H1 is less than, so we will look at on the negative side. So sini kena negative. And then your alpha is alpha since the case is one tail. Okay, no need to divide by 2. Okay, so negative Z, so your alpha is 0.05. So tengok je daripada table, sama je. Okay, Z 0.05. So 1.6449. Okay. Don't forget the negative. 1.6449. Okay, so this is your critical value, and then next step is your decision rule. So decision rule sama, we look at on your hash 1. Since hash 1 the case is less than, so kita akan refer kepada less than lah, yang ini. Okay, so kita kata reject hash null if Z calculated is less than negative Z alpha. Okay. And then kita punya decision. So our decision, we will compare this value with this value. Okay, kita akan compare dua ni. So decision kita kata since Z calculated is equal to negative 2. So negative 2 is more than or less than negative 1.6449. Less than. Okay, so dia less than negative Z 0.05. So we reject or fail to reject our hash null. Reject ke fail to reject? Since kita kata we only reject our hash null if Z calculated is less than negative Z critical value.
Reject.
Reject. So we reject our hash null. So bila kita reject our hash null, so kita mengatakan memang below 24. So this is our decision. Okay. So to make your conclusion, sama ada enough or not enough evidence. So soalan tanya either there is enough, there is evidence to indicate that the mean lifetime of 3 average is below 24 months. So ini adalah questions dia. And then when we test, memang kita reject our hash null. Kita mengatakan memang below 24 months. Okay. So bila we make our conclusion, so kita akan kata there is enough evidence. And then salin je lah. Okay, to indicate that the mean lifetime of 3A batteries is below 24 months. Okay, so this is how to answer hypothesis testing questions. Okay, so in this case, we cannot use p-value since there is no Spss output. Okay, but kalau you nak guna confidence interval boleh. Okay, so maksudnya in step 2 ni you guna this formula lah. Okay, you dapatkan the lower and upper limit. Okay, you dapatkan you punya lower and upper limit, and then nanti decision rule you kata you akan reject hash null if 0 is not in the confidence interval, and nanti you check lah either 0 is in the confidence interval or not. Then nanti you akan dapat conclusion sama, enough evidence. Okay. So make sure you hati-hati, okay, untuk you punya conclusion ni. If your decision is correct, you kata reject hash null. But in the conclusion you kata there is not enough evidence. So dia dah tak tally, so you akan hilang markah in your conclusion. Okay, so make sure you check. Okay, check betul-betul. Okay, so that's why kat sini I buat macam ni. Okay, yang ni sebenarnya you tak payah buat pun tak apa. But nak bagi you nampak sama ada enough ke not enough evidence tu, you boleh je buat, tak ada masalah. Okay. And then lagi satu, kalau you confuse, okay, untuk you punya decision tu, sama ada you nak reject or fail to reject you punya hash null, okay, you can draw the distribution, okay. But there is no marks for this distribution. So we know that our critical value is the value that divide your rejection region and non-rejection region. So in this case, our critical value is negative 1.6449. So maksudnya your critical value ni kat sini lah, negative 1.6449. 449. So to know which is the rejection and rejection region, so since the case is less than, so our rejection region dekat negatif lah. Okay, belah negatif. Okay, so if the value lies on this region, so kita akan reject hash null. But if the value is in this region, so kita fail to reject our hash null. Okay, in this case, our test statistic is -2. So we know that -2 is in this one. So maksudnya dia duduk dalam rejection region. That's why our decision is reject hash null. Okay, so kalau you confuse, you boleh lukis. Tapi lukis ni tak ada markah lah. Okay, no marks. Okay, so itu adalah untuk example 4.1. Boleh? Boleh tak?
Boleh.
Boleh. Alright, so yang ni example. Okay, so this is for the first method we use formula, and then for the second method, if the question give you output, yang ini example lah, example ni ada output. So bila ada output, you tengoklah since the case is less than, so kita tahu the p value given here is for two tail. That's why your p value ni you kena bahagi dua. Okay, so even though the value is 0.002, if you divide by 2, you will get the same value, but you need to show. Okay, you need to show since to know that you apa nama itu, you understand the concept. Okay, so you just show 0.002 divided by 2 is equal to this one. Okay, make sure you show lah. Okay, and then buat macam biasa, your decision rule, reject hash null if p value less than or equal to alpha, and then you compare your value. Okay, for example dekat sini dia bagi alpha dia is 0.05. Ni for example je. Okay, so you compare these two value and then you akan dapat reject hash null sama. Or you can use confidence interval. So you masukkan dalam substitute into the formula, and then you akan dapat your lower and upper limit is this one. And then decision rule, you akan reject hash null if 0 is not in the confidence interval. So bila kita check 0 memang tak ada dalam confidence interval, that's why we reject hash null since 0 is not in the confidence interval. So conclusion you akan dapat samalah, there is enough evidence. Okay, so macam I mention, kalau soalan tu dia bagi method mana you kena follow, but if the questions do not mention any method, you boleh pilih lah mana-mana. Tapi nak mudah, you can use p value. Since p value tak perlu nak refer table. Okay, kalau you guna test statistik nanti you kena tengok critical value berapa nilai dia. Okay, so ini adalah untuk first questions. So yang kat sini 449. Okay. So ini adalah untuk first example. So we look on the second case, which is for variance or standard deviation for the population is unknown. So bila unknown, we must check our sample size, either large or small sample. In this case, this is for large sample. So this is the assumption in the sample, the population is normally distributed, sample size is large, and unknown variance or standard deviation for the population. So sama, this is the first step, your hypothesis, and then the second step, your test statistic. So this is the formula. So now kat sini jadi standard deviation for sample lah. And then the third one, your critical value. So for critical value sama, you refer to your H1 is your H1 is less than. Okay. So kalau dia less than, dia akan jadi negative Z alpha. If the case is more than, Z alpha. If the case is unequal, plus minus Z alpha over 2. Okay, so and then the next one is decision rule, and then your decision, and then conclusion. Okay, so this is the step. So kita tengok on the next example. Okay, example 4.2. So kat sekata a pharmaceutical manufacturer purchases a particular material from a supplier. Okay, and then the manufacturer select 30 shipments. So that is your N. And then the sample means and variance. So your X bar 1 point S square is equal to 0.273. Test at 5% level or significant. Okay, whether the average percentage of impurity is different from 1.8. So that is your mu. So dia suruh you test either the average percentage tu different from 1.8. So sama kita tengok since the case is for variance or the variance for the sample, kita tahu this the case for variance or standard deviation for the population is unknown. Okay, so bila unknown, kita tahu we have two cases, either more than or less, more than and equal to 30 or less than 30. So in this cases, your n is equal to 30, so the case is large sample. So nanti bila step kedua tu, you akan use this formula. Okay. So untuk first step, okay, so our H0 and H1, since the question asks you sama ada dia difference daripada 1.8, so this will be our H1. Okay, so that is your hypothesis. And then for step 2, so we find our Z calculated, just substitute into the formula. Okay, so X bar is 1.89 minus 1.8 over, so this is the value for variance, so you need to square root the value, 0.273 over square root of 30. So what will be the value for Z calculated?
I got 0.9435.
Okay, 0.9435. Okay, so this is the value. And then for our critical value, okay, so since this is the case for two-tail, okay, so your critical value dia akan jadi plus minus Z alpha over 2. Okay, so dia akan jadi plus minus Z. So alpha is 0.05. So alpha over 2 is 0.025. So kita akan ada two value lah. Okay, 1.96. Okay, and then next one is your decision rule. So decision rule kita akan ada dua lah. Either reject H null if Z calculated is less than negative Z alpha over 2, or Z calculated is more than Z alpha over 2. Okay, so itu adalah untuk your decision rule. Now, untuk your decision, so untuk decision, since we have two value for critical value, so what you need to do is you must compare these two value with this one. Okay, test statistic ni can compare with this one. So first we look at on the negative side dulu. So kita kata since Z calculated is 0.9435. So ini kita look on the negative side dulu. Okay, so kita kata since Z calculated, so dia more than ke less than this value? More than ke less than negative 1.96?
More than.
More than. Okay, so bila dia more than, kita reject ke kita fail to reject? Since kita kata kita akan reject kalau Z cal ni less than negative Z critical value.
Fail to reject.
Okay, kita fail to reject H null. Okay, so this is for negative side. So now kita tengok untuk positif lah. So untuk positif, kita kata since Z calculated is equal to 5. So this value is more than or less than this value?
Less than.
More than. Okay, so kalau more than kita reject ke kita fail to reject? More than ke less than? Less than. So kita reject ke kita fail to reject?
Reject.
To reject.
Kita kata kita hanya akan reject kalau dia more than. Tapi ni less than. So
Reject.
fail to reject.
Fail to reject.
Okay, sebab kita hanya akan reject kalau nilai yang ini lebih besar daripada nilai yang ini. Okay, so kita fail to reject. So how to know either we want to reject or fail to reject these two? Okay, so kita akan refer. Kalau ini untuk case H1 unequal. Okay, so kalau case dia, okay, you dapat satu fail to reject, satu you dapat reject. Okay, so if either one is reject, so kita akan kata reject hash null. Okay, so the second case is both kita kata reject hash null. Okay, dua-dua ni reject. Okay, so dia akan jadi reject hash null. Okay, tapi kalau case dia dua-dua fail to reject hash null, so dia akan jadi fail to reject hash null. Okay, so in this case, since both is fail to reject hash null, so kita concludekan dia fail to reject hash null. So maksudnya kita mengatakan dia equal to 1.8. Tak ada beza pula. Okay, so when you make your conclusion, macam mana nak buat conclusion? Enough ke not enough evidence? Untuk mengatakan average percentage tu different from 1.8.
Not enough.
Not enough.
Okay, there is not enough evidence. And then just salin je lah to conclude that the average percentage of impurities is different. Okay, so macam ni lah nak jawab soalan. So untuk unequal ni dia special sikit. So you kena compare untuk both side lah. Okay, untuk tengok. And then tengok kalau satu fail to reject, satu reject, you akan reject lah. Kalau dua-dua reject, memang kita akan reject. Kalau dua-dua fail to reject, kita akan fail to reject. Okay, so you tengok case dia yang mana satu. Okay, so that is for example 4.2. So kita tengok on example 4.3. So now the question give you the SPSS output. Okay, SPSS output for case 1 population mean. Okay, so kat sini kata based on the information given by the housekeeper, it was found that the hotel has produced 6.1 kg of solid waste daily. So this is the SPSS output. So this is for one sample statistic. So this is your N. This is your mean and your standard deviation for sample. Okay, and then for one sample test, so this is your test value. So test value ni is your mu. Okay, this is your mu. So kalau the test value is 0, so dia tak ada nak test untuk hypothesis testing lah tu. Okay, and then this is your test statistic. Okay, this is your test statistic. Refer, since in this case, the case is large, so this is your z-cal lah. Z calculated. This is the value. Okay. And then the degree of freedom. So since this is for case 1 population, so n minus 1. And then this is your p value. Okay, your significant level, significant value you for two tail. And then mean difference. So this is your x bar minus mu naught. And then this is your lower and upper limit for 98% confidence interval. Okay, so for A, if the researcher would like to test whether the mean weight of the solid waste is different from 6.1 kg, what will be the null and alternative hypothesis? Okay, the question asks you to write the null and alternative hypothesis. So buat je macam biasa. Okay, so for A, dia nak tahu beza ke tak ada beza. So mu is equal to 6.1. And then this one jadi unequal to 6.1. Okay, so ini questions ask you sama ada difference tak daripada 6.1. And then for B, based on the P value. So now the questions already mentioned about the method or the procedure which method yang you akan guna. So now dia suruh based on the P value. So kita akan tengok on this value. Okay, so for B, dia kata, can the researcher conclude that the mean weight of the solid waste is different? Since in A, we already made our hypothesis, so for B, no need to write. Okay, no need to write your hypothesis. Just terus continue with the p-value. Okay, but you must be careful since this p-value is given for 2 tail and our case is 2 tail. So just take the value. Okay, kalau case ni adalah for 1 tail, so you kena divide by 2 lah. Okay, and then now the problem is the question do not give you the value for alpha. Okay, so how to know what is our value for alpha? So kalau tak ada, you check with your output. Since this is 98% confidence interval, so your alpha is 0.02. Okay, so your alpha is 0.02. Okay, but if the questions do not give you this output, SPSS output ni memang tak ada, dia memang tak bagi alpha, so you guna alpha at default, you guna 5%. Okay, so kalau macam dalam questions tu tak ada mention about value of alpha, you guna at default 5%. Or kalau confidence interval, you guna 95 lah. Okay, so ini adalah untuk case kalau dia tak bagi value. Okay, so in this case, since dia bagi output, so you tengok value yang dekat output ni lah. So alpha is 0.02, and then next step is your decision rule. Okay, reject hash null if p value is less than or equal to alpha, and then since p value is equal to 0.000, so this value is less than your alpha. So reject or fail to reject hash null? Reject or fail to reject hash null?
Reject.
Reject. Okay, reject hash null. So bila reject hash null, so kita mengatakan dia memang difference lah daripada 6.1. So you punya conclusion. So kita kata there is enough evidence to conclude that the mean weight of the solid waste is different from 6.1 kilogram. Okay, so make sure bila soalan ni macam ni, make sure you buat sampai conclusion lah. Okay, jangan sekerat je. Okay, so that is for B. And then for C, yang C, the question asks you to construct 95% confidence interval. So now the case is this one lah. Okay, you kena guna yang ini. Okay, this formula. You get your lower and upper limit. So for C, the question asks you to find this value. Okay. So just substitute into the formula. Okay, so your X bar value ni dah ada dah kat sini. Okay, 5.2714. So Z 0.025. So this one dia ada bagi tak standard error mean? Okay, tak ada. So you need to write the value. So standard deviation is 1.11871 square root of 35. Okay. So nanti you akan dapat this is the value 1.96. Alright. So in this case, nanti bila you dapat ni, you akan dapat the lower limit is 4.9008, and then this one you akan dapat 5.6420. But you must be careful since in this output we have the test value. Okay, kalau you tengok dekat output ni, dia tulis test value is equal to 0, tak ada masalah. No need to minus the test value since your test value is 0. But in this case, the test value is 6.1, so this is not your final answer. Okay, you need to minus 6.1 from this value. So maksudnya 4.9008 minus 6.1. So nanti you akan dapat negative 1.1992. Okay. So this is barulah you punya final answer. So kat sini, okay, mass minus with test value. Okay. So if your test value is 0, so tak ada masalah lah. Dia akan sama je lah value dia. But if the test value is not 0, so you kena tolak lah. Okay. So ini baru dia punya final answer. Okay. So itu untuk C. So any problems for this example? Boleh? Boleh tak? 4.3.
Boleh, Miss.
Boleh. So kalau tak ada masalah, kita tengok on the last case, which is for variance or standard deviation for the population is unknown for small sample. Okay, so for small sample ni dia berbeza sikit since kita akan tengok on T distribution lah. Okay, so bila kita punya critical value tu, dia akan berbeza sikit. Kalau case dia ada less than, so dia akan jadi negative T alpha n minus 1. Since degree of freedom for one population mean is n minus 1. Dia kalau case dia more than, so sini T alpha n minus 1. Kalau case dia adalah unequal, so dia akan jadi plus minus T alpha over 2 n minus 1. Okay, and then dia punya decision rule dia masih sama. Cuma yang berbeza dia adalah dia jadi T lah, T calculated. Okay, and then you punya decision. And then last one is you punya conclusion. Okay, so kita tengok on this example, the speed limit is states 90 km per hour. So this is your mu. And then dia kata a sample of 15 car. So your n is 15. The sample mean. So this is your sample mean and standard deviation. Dia suruh test at 5% significant level. Okay. There is evidence to indicate that the car travelling along this highway exceed the speed limit. So sama, since this is the case for variance, standard deviation is unknown. And then you kena check with the sample size. Since n is less than 30, so kita akan guna T distribution. Okay. So since question ask you about level of significance, so sama you kena buat all the step. So H1, H0 is always equal. And then for your H1, since the question asks you either the mean is exceed the speed limit, so maksudnya more than 90. Okay. And then the second step, so now kita akan kira our T calculated. Okay, using the formula. Okay, so just substitute the value. So berapa dia akan dapat the value nanti?
I got 2.0656.
Okay, 2.0656. And then the third one, since we use formula, so find the critical value. So anything we will refer to our H1. So since our H1 is more than, so dia akan jadi T alpha. Okay, positive, and then alpha no need to divide by 2, and then our degree of freedom. Okay, so T 0.05, 15 minus 1. Okay, so dia akan jadi nanti value dia is 1.761. Okay. And then next step is your decision rule. Reject H null if T calculated is more than, since case kita is more than. And then we will compare these two value. So decision kita kata since T calculated is equal to 2.0656. So more than or less than your critical value.
More.
More than. So reject or fail to reject your H null?
Reject.
Reject. Okay, so bila kita reject H null, so kita mengatakan memang exceed the speed limit. So when you write your conclusion, so kita akan kata there is enough evidence. Okay, to indicate that, macam biasalah, just copy the sentence. Car travelling along this highway exceed the speed limit. Okay. So itu adalah untuk this question. So sama kalau macam you tak nampak, tapi usually kalau macam untuk case apa nama itu positif tak ada masalah sangat. Okay, kalau you tak nampak you boleh je lukis. Okay, 1.761. So this is your rejection region. Since our test value is 2.0656, so that's why kita reject H null. Okay. Alright, so okay, for example 4.4 boleh?
Boleh.
So kalau okay, kita tengok on the last example for small sample. So this is the R&D department imposed that the mean life of the light bulb produced should exceed 4,000 hours with a standard deviation less than 150. And then a sample of 15 bulb were tested. So this is the data. So dia bagi dekat you Spss output. So you know that this is your N, your X bar, your S over square root of N. And this is your test value, your mu. And this is your test statistic. Since the case is for small sample, so this is your T-cal. This is your N minus 1, so this is your P value. This is your mean difference and your lower and upper limit. Okay, so in these questions, the question asks you to write the null and alternative hypothesis. So dekat sini, since dia kata exceed 4,000, so we know that that is your H1. So for A, H null is always equal. And then for H1, dia akan exceed 4,000. Okay. So that is your hypothesis. And then for B, the question asks you to show the value of the test statistic is 10.866. So dia suruh show the T-cal is equal to this value. Okay, just substitute into the formula. Since we know that this is the value for this one, just ambil je lah 350 bahagi dengan you punya standard error mean, this value. Then dia suruh show this value, so just tulis je lah. Okay. And then for C, write the decision rule, use 5% significant level. Okay, so you punya CV, so for CV, since the case is more than, so T alpha N minus 1. Okay, so T 0.05, so N is 15, 15 minus 1 is 14. Okay, so dia akan jadi 1.761. And then decision rule, so your decision rule, since the case is more than, kata reject H null if T calculated is more than T critical value. Okay, and then barulah D, write the decision and the conclusion. So for our decision, we will compare the value for your test statistic and critical value. So we say that since your T calculated is equal to 10.866, which is more than your critical value, so we reject or fail to reject our H null?
Reject.
Reject. Okay. So we reject our H null. So bila kita reject, kita mengatakan memang dia exceed 4,000. So kita kata there is enough evidence. Okay, to indicate that the mean life of the light bulb produce 4,000 hours. Okay, so this is how to answer the questions for hypothesis testing for one population mean. Okay, so untuk next week kita akan tengok on two population means pula. Okay, bila melibatkan two population, so now kita tak akan compare dengan value lah, kita akan compare between the two population. Okay, so yang tu kita akan tengok on next week. Okay, so for tomorrow's class, macam yang I kata, kita akan buat quiz. Okay, so for the first assessment, so nanti I will give you the appendix, okay, sekali dengan questions. So untuk appendix ni dia tak ada apa pun. So nanti kalau you tengok on past year or previous past year, so kalau before this tak ada ODL, seat dekat dalam apa nama tu hall, exam hall tu memang dia akan bagi formula yang ini sajalah. But since sekarang ni ODL, so you boleh refer to your notes, tak ada masalah. Okay, tapi just nak explain je since saya masukkan sekali the formula. So usually for appendix untuk topik tu, okay, dia hanya akan bagi dekat you the formula for mean, standard deviation, coefficient of variation and Pearson measure of skewness. So kalau buka open book test yang you memang duduk dekat day one exam, you jawab soalan, so memang hanya diberi this formula only. Okay, so tapi nanti untuk you punya apa yang masa sekarang ni you boleh open any notes lah, tak ada masalah. Okay, so yang ini adalah formula untuk mean and standard deviation. So kalau you tengok for standard deviation we have two formula, so you boleh guna either one. So basically you akan guna yang ni lah, lebih mudah. Okay, the first formula. And then untuk confidence interval, okay, so untuk confidence interval you akan nampak this formula. So sama kalau you sit for examination yang memang dalam apa nama itu dewan exam, you hanya ada this formula sahaja. Okay, yang lain tu memang you kena ingat. Okay, so dia akan bagi the value, the formula for large sample when variance or standard deviation for the population is unknown. So bila known, you kena pandai-pandai lah. You kena tahulah Z alpha over 2 masih sama, cuma kat sini dia tukar sigma saja. Okay, yang itulah. And then yang ini dia bagi untuk small sample, untuk case n less than 30, and then dia bagi degree of freedom. And then kalau untuk two population pula, dia hanya bagi untuk small sample sahaja. Okay, maksudnya dia hanya bagi T sahaja. So you kena tahulah kalau macam large, okay, dia punya formulanya adalah this one. Okay, yang ini. Ni kalau known, yang ni kalau unknown. Okay, tapi untuk quiz esok you can refer this formula juga, tak ada masalah. Okay, so and then this one is for equal variance, this one for unequal variance, and then this one for your dependent sample. So just nak explain on this one je lah. Okay, sebab saya include sekali dengan question untuk esok. So untuk esok akan ada 3 questions. Okay, 3 soalan. Satu soalan from topic 1, satu lagi soalan untuk topic 2, and the last questions for topic 3 lah. Okay, all the topic. And then the marks is 30 marks. Okay, 30 markah. So you have 1 hour to answer all the questions. Okay, so nanti for tomorrow, so nanti make sure when you answer your questions, make sure you start your answer for new questions on new page. For example, you dah jawab question 1. Okay, this is your question 1. So contohnya dah jawab sampai sini. And then for question 2, even dah ada space pun, make sure you start next page. Okay, for question 2. And then sama for question 3. Okay, and then you write your answer. So make sure don't miss your answer. Jangan tiba-tiba you submit question 1 dengan question 2 saja. Question 3 tertinggal. Okay, make sure you check your answer before you upload. Okay, in Google Classroom. So sama, make sure nanti when you snap your answer, make sure compile in one PDF file. Okay, dalam satu PDF file all your answer, and then make sure you name your file. Okay, your name, and then your student ID, and then your group .pdf. Okay, and then baru you upload dalam Google Classroom, and then you turn in. Okay, so macam before you upload tu, make sure you check. Okay, jangan you tertinggal soalan. Okay, so nanti rugilah. Okay, so itu saja. So any questions before we end our class? Boleh? Okay tak?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, so nanti yang untuk for one population mean ni, so nanti you boleh try lah the tutorial. Okay, so beza dia kalau you tengok untuk one population mean ni dia memang at 2.5 significant level. So memang dia dah mention significant level. Kalau yang previous ni for confidence interval dia kata construct 90% confidence interval. So berbeza lah. Kalau soalan macam ni you just dapatkan lower and upper limit. Tapi bila melibatkan soalan hypothesis testing, ada perkataan significant level, so you need to do from hypothesis until your conclusion. Okay, so untuk yang quiz esok tu jangan confuse pula, yang quiz esok tu tak ada yang 5 steps tu, hanya sampai lower and upper limit saja. Okay, and then you kena ingat balik lah, nak tahu sama ada dia kalau macam soalan C ni, dia memang akan kata based on confidence interval. Sama ada difference ke tak. So kalau macam soalan macam yang ini, you tak boleh nak jawab soalan ni menggunakan macam ini. Okay, wrong. Since the question asks you based on confidence interval. So bila based on confidence interval, you hanya tengok nilai 950 tu ada dalam confidence interval ke tak ada dalam confidence interval. Kalau soalan tu kata based on significant level, barulah you buat all these steps tu. Sebab tu markah dia kat sini 2 markah saja. Okay, kalau macam ini markah dia selalunya dalam 5 ataupun 6 markah. Okay, untuk you jawab steps tu. So make sure jangan confuse. Okay, antara confidence interval dengan hypothesis testing. Okay, so kalau tak ada any question, so thank you for today. Don't forget to fill up the attendance in Google Classroom. So untuk tomorrow's class, we will start at 2 lah. Okay, so nanti before 10 minutes before I will upload the questions. Okay, so all the questions I will upload in the Google Classroom. Okay, so kalau tak ada any questions, thank you for today. So see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you.
Alright.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you, Miss.
Excuse me, Miss. Nak tengok example 4.3 boleh?
4 point?
4.3.
Mana ni? Ni. Ni.
4.3. Sekejap. Tengah lagi.
Ni. Betul?
Yang ni.
Boleh? Alright.
Nak screenshot je. Thank you.
Dah.
Thank you.
Alright. Okay.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you, Miss.
Alright.
Oh, kelas dah habis. Kelas dah habis. Kelas dah habis kelas dah habis.
Ya, Irfan. Apa yang selekeh. Irfan. Esok test chapter apa?
1 sampai 3.
Apa yang madam kata upper limit, lower limit je? Yang tak masuk sampai 5 step bla bla bla.
Chapter 4 tak masuk sampai apa tah? Tak ingat Yang first apa tu? Tak ingat aku ingat. Apa nama dia tu?
Apa Izzat duduk bernafas macam tu?
Dengar.
Buat
Apa nama dia? Coefficient intervals apa?
coefficient. Kenapa dengan yang tu?
Dia kata yang tu tak ambil full step dia sampai upper limit dengan lower limit je. Aku pun tak sure sebab aku tak study lagi.
Tolong aku esok. Tak mampu.
Wait,